and welcome back to the Slug Show. I'm Elise Laetz, and this is episode 4. I had a really cool episode for today, and I had it almost edited, but I underestimated the complexity of this topic, and I didn't feel like I did an adequate job of explaining it to you. So I'm going to bring that episode next time, and for now, I'm going to show you how I replicate the ocean in my lab. So welcome to Museum Koenig, my office, and my setup. I have 2 large flat tanks where I grow the algae my slugs eat, a bucket where I prepare new salt water, and a bunch of little tanks where my experiments take place. Some of these tanks are breeding tanks where I let the slugs live happy lives so they make me babies, and others contain animals that are in my experiments. My algae grow in rocks alongside a whole host of other marine life forms, including sponges, other mollusks, and other kinds of algae, so each of these tanks is a mini ecosystem. All of these organisms require nutrients from the water and produce waste. So that's why I have to change half of the water in each tank every 2 days. So the question I want to ask you today is about this water. These animals are marine, so they live in the water. When I change the water in these tanks, I have to add salt so that the salinity, or the amount of salt in the water, is the same as it is in the Mediterranean. So I would like you to guess how much salt I have to put in this bucket of water. The bucket holds about 2 gallons, or 9 liters. Do I need A, 34 grams, or 2 tablespoons, B, 100 grams, or 3.5 ounces, C, 300 grams, or 10.5 ounces, or D, 500 grams, which is more than a pound. It's a pound and 1.6 ounces. If you guess C, you are correct. It takes about 300 grams of salt to match the water in the Mediterranean to the pure water I can get here in the lab, and that's a lot of salt. So the salt I use for these aquarium comes directly from the ocean. It's dehydrated salt water, and that's good for my tanks because it also has all of the nutrients that the animals would get from the ocean. To be sure that the salinity is correct, I check the water with a hydrometer. This device measures the specific gravity of a liquid. In this case, we want the amount of salt and water in a certain volume at room temperature. My hydrometer is weighted with a bulb so it floats upright and has a scale inside that's calibrated for seawater. It works based on the Archimedes principle. Basically, a solid suspended in a fluid will be buoyed upward by a force equal to the weight of the fluid displaced by the submerged part of the suspended solid. That means that in lower density liquids, the hydrometer sinks. When I add salt, the density increases because the dissolved salts increase the mass by a larger proportion than the volume. We measure salinity in parts per thousand. The Mediterranean is saltier than the other oceans, so its salinity is 38 parts per thousand versus the overall ocean average of 34.7. This is because the rate of evaporation is higher than the amounts of fresh water entering the sea from rivers and rain. It's almost completely cut off from the Atlantic Ocean, so there's very little mixing there, and the Red Sea is even saltier, so any mixing on that side actually drives the Mediterranean salinity even higher. My hydrometer has a green band on the scale showing me the normal range for seawater. Using this chart, I figured out the correct density, which told me that the very bottom of the green line corresponds to the correct salinity. So it's easy now. All I have to do is add salt until the bottom of the green band matches the water level. So what you saw there is the episode I wrote and recorded for this week. I almost had it edited and uploaded before catastrophic failure number 2 happened. I had a bacterial bloom sweep through 6 of my 7 aquaria. It suffocated everything in a thick, clear slime about 1 centimeter or half an inch thick. It started earlier in the week and then exploded over all of my tanks, killing about 20 animals. So I'm down to about 10, and I'm not convinced that they are fit enough to undergo experimentation, since their tank was also infected. Many of the other animals living on my rocks also died, and I'm unsure about the health of the algae. We all know what food dye dropped into water looks like. To show you the amount of slime in the water, I tried dropping some food color into the water, and this is what happened. The slime won't interact with the food dye, so the dye rushes to the edges of the tank. As soon as it slips underneath the slime layer, it mixes with the water. Gross. Luckily, one of my tanks survived, and I still have some algae. I have cleaned everything, but there is likely no recovering from this. And even if the animals make a full recovery, I doubt they'll be usable in my experiments. There are just too many unknown variables. This means that a lot of the work I have done since August, prepping the animals for experimentation, is lost. I've done a lot of other work too, so it's not 2 months of wasted time, but it's enough time to set me back pretty far. So my boss and I have redesigned some of our plans to account for this and decided that I should return to France and Spain to collect more. That means restarting the experiments with new animals, and it's quite a setback. On the bright side, next week I will go back to France and Spain to collect more animals. My boyfriend Matt has been drafted as an assistant and a driver, so hopefully it should be a nice trip. That said, these trips are always really stressful, there's a lot of work to do, so it's not really a vacation, actually not a vacation at all. So anyway, thanks for watching. It's been a really rough week, but I'm optimistic next week will be a bit better. Feel free to comment, subscribe, everything in the comments below, and I'll see you next week from France.